I'm Margaret Sullivan, and I'm a columnist for The Guardian US, writing weekly on politics, media, and culture. I spent a great deal of my career in local journalism at a local newspaper in my hometown of Buffalo, New York. I started there as a summer intern and eventually became the top editor of the paper. And I saw over my time there that the local journalism that we were doing was extremely important for tying the community together and giving people a common set of facts so that, you can disagree, you can have different opinions about things, but do you have sort of a basic understanding of the reality? And that's what newspapers and local media does all over the country and, in fact, all over the world. But that is fading. I mean, my newspaper, which had for many years 200 people in its newsroom, now is down to about 50. And you simply cannot do the job. The paper is now owned by a chain, which is what's happened all over the country. Hedge funds have come in, and this is happening everywhere. So there are 2 newspapers a week going out of business in the United States, most of those weeklies, but not all. And what we're seeing as a result is that people no longer have, in many areas, no longer have a common ground of reality to walk on, and a kind of a common ground that gives you the ability to be in a democracy, to self-govern. Journalism helps us understand what's going on in our world. It holds government accountable. It holds powerful people accountable, business people and others in a community. It allows people to do the basic work of democracy, which is to self-govern, to go to the voting booth informed about who's running, to know how your schools in your area are running, to know how your taxes are being spent. If we don't have that, and that comes with the labor-intensive and rather expensive work of reporting, then as citizens, we're hobbled. We can't really do the work of democracy, which is to govern ourselves. I think that we need to be focused as journalists on the stakes and the consequences of this election. Not so much on polls, not so much on the horse race, who's ahead this day, who's behind this day, but rather what happens when this person or this person is elected. And Trump helps us in this way because he's been very upfront about what he wants to do, and it's very scary. He gave an interview recently to Time magazine, and when you read the interview about the kinds of things he wants to do, about deporting people, about tracking women's pregnancies, all these sorts of things, about putting his allies in places in which there have traditionally been public servants and civil servants, it's really very scary. But do people know that? Is the media really getting that across? Or are we hearing endless stories about the outrage of the day, the gaffe of the day, how old these candidates are, particularly how old Joe Biden is? And we know how old they are. It doesn't actually change day to day. But that's where the emphasis is, and not very much on the stakes. So my friend, another press critic, Jay Rosen, who's at NYU, has an expression which has caught on a little bit, which is, and it's a horse race metaphor, he says, not the odds, but the stakes. And I think if we can keep that in mind, we shouldn't be covering the odds, who's up, who's down, who's going to win, what exactly is happening in this poll. But the stakes of the election, I think, will be in much better shape in terms of informing the public. In some fairly basic way, democracy is on the ballot. So, we never want to, we're always very wary of being accused of being in any candidate's camp. And that's not what I'm saying here. But I am saying that if Donald Trump is elected again, I think we have real threats to democracy, and people should absolutely be aware of that. We only have to look at the recent past to know. The 2020 election is one that we know was legitimate. There was no great rigging. There was no horrible election fraud. And yet former President Trump continues to this day to say that he was the one who was actually elected. And he requires, as a sort of loyalty test or litmus test for anyone he endorses or anyone that he would put in power, to say with him that the election was illegitimate. And we also saw what happened on January 6th with the siege of the Capitol. I mean, we already know what will happen, and we were saved from some of the worst effects of that by people who were wonderful public servants, secretaries of state, who refused to go along with, sort of the fraud that was being asked for. But in a new term, I think that wouldn't be the case. There would be a really strong effort to have allies everywhere and a very free hand. America's powerful, and it does help to set the tone. I think that the kind of populism that, if that's the right word for it, that Trump has embodied is a movement that's spreading throughout the world. And, I think there is a kind of a spread that will happen if he's elected. It gives a sort of power, and it gives a kind of approval to other leaders who want to also go down a road of authoritarianism or near authoritarianism. We have to sort of help each other and remind each other what our democracy is based on, which is the involvement of citizens. So I think there's leadership, and it doesn't have to be at the highest levels. It can be your neighbor. You can say, for example, to your neighbor, what are your news sources? Do you subscribe to the Buffalo News? And if they say, oh no, I get my news on TikTok, you may want to challenge that or at least help inform them. So I think it's a multi-part thing, and there's no single answer, but we all have to try.